Okay, so we kind of get started. I went ahead and did my screen share, so I won't forget to do that. And I did go ahead and start the recording. So good evening, everyone. It's good to see each and every one of you that were able to join this evening. I know several have things going on, and just kind of want to remind everyone that each time we do a Zoom session like this, it will be recorded, and I try to always have it posted that same evening that we do the Zoom. So for anybody that needs to go back and review something, just check in the announcement section on Blackboard, and you'll see a YouTube link always converted over and uploaded into YouTube and create a link for it. So just kind of wanted to start off quickly this evening before we kind of get into some of the readings this week. I wanted to go and just kind of review quickly the current assignment that's going to be coming up due this Sunday, and then also talk about the next assignment just to make sure everyone kind of understands, and then take just a few minutes to see if you and your group members, team members, have any questions regarding the group interview paper that will be due this Sunday. I've had a few questions sent via email, so I just kind of wanted to open it up for a few minutes to see if anyone has questions to clarify. So just to make sure we all know, a courtesy reminder that the interview project report will be due this Sunday evening on or before 11:59, essentially before midnight. And that is a group submission. And so when you signed up for your groups, it links everything to your group based on who is registered. And so when you submit that, if you're in group 1, when you submit that, it will show up on my end in Blackboard where you are connected to that group. It will show that I have an assignment submission that needs to be graded for group 1, and it affects all the group members. So I'll be able to tell it on my end, but you may not on your end. So don't stress over that. Again, this is the only group assignment for this course, this summer semester. Additionally, with this, you'll see if you looked at your syllabus, with this also, I think it had a group contract template. Just kind of explains who your group members are and kind of the responsibilities. It's in the template section, so make sure you guys complete that. Then there is an individual assignment submission that goes with this project, and it is the peer assessment collaboration rubric. And so there is a single page template in Blackboard under like SPED 805 resources, and you are to list all your group members in that assessment collaboration, your peer assessment collaboration reflection. And basically it's just going to ask you to go in there and rate your team members' participation, and you'll rate them 1 through 4, and it gives you the information for each score. Please make sure to include your name, even though you are rating your peers. So Dawn, if you have 3 other group members with you, you want to make sure you list yourself on that, and then you will do a self evaluation as well. So make sure you include yourself on that. Okay, a lot of times students in this course forget to do that, so I just want to emphasize that. And that essentially in itself is easy points on the peer assessment collaboration rubric. It's 45 points. You just list your team members and you rate them. They don't see it. You're the only one that knows how you rated them. It's not something I go and publish and send out. It's just your submission, your view on how your team worked well, work together in specific areas. Then looking ahead, I'm getting ahead another week, looking at 6/26, which will be 1 week from Sunday, will be your first individual report that's due or assignment, and that will be over the informal assessments. And so we'll kind of talk about that at the end of the session as far as the informal assessments and what qualifies for that. So again, that is an individual paper. It's not a group assignment, it's individual. With these moving forward, guys, I want to remind you, after you do your group project and you move over towards all individual, each time you do a series of assessments, even if you're going to use the same student all the way through on all of them, you still need to go ahead and make sure you submit the permission form with your assignment. So with the informal assessment report, you'll want to make sure to include the permission form, basically for that child, and their parent signs it, basically that you're participating in some assignments in a graduate program, and you're going to administer a series of assessments for the purpose of this class. And basically, in a nutshell, it states that it's used for this intent purpose for this class only. Okay, so even if it's the same student all through the summer, you will still submit that permission form. Okay, if you're using different ones, it's really important to make sure you get a new updated permission form. If you're going to use multiple students due to availability, you definitely will want to make sure you get a new one each time if it's a new student. Okay, any questions on that? I just kind of wanted to do a broad overview of that quickly. So this Sunday will be the group project on or before midnight, and then the following week we're going to get into the informal assessment, and it'll be due on the 26th. Before I go over the PowerPoint, I just kind of wanted to take just a few minutes and see if any of you have any specific questions related to the interview project paper that's due this Sunday. Do you want to take just a few minutes and ask me I can clarify anything for you?
I have a question really quick.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
I was the only one that signed up for group 2. What do you suggest I do for the points? Hang on, I'm trying to organize my thoughts. So the peer review
assessment,
and
go ahead,
all of that.
fill it out on yourself. I've ran into this before in previous semesters where it ended up being the only one. I did have another student that emailed me, what do I do? And told them basically at this point in time, knowing we're getting closer to the due date, proceed forward individually. They didn't have anyone else join their group. So when it comes up time to do the peer assessment rubric, you list your name on there and rate yourself, and you'll submit it and upload it. That way you'll still get points, but make sure you do it and submit it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other ones? One thing that's been a common question, I'll just go ahead and throw it out there, that was sent to me by email the last few days, is kind of worried about, do we just create a fictitious person and apply our information to it, or do we need to mention all of us, kind of do a brief introduction of the individuals we interviewed? And the answer to that is you need to do a brief introduction to in the report to make sure you mention and describe the individuals that you interviewed. So Dawn, yours might have been a school psych. You mentioned there's a school psychologist in your district that's been helpful. I don't know if you selected her or not, or him, but I'm using that as an example. Paige might have used the special ed director. So you would want to basically state, who they are, what their position or title is. And also I would include their experience. How many years have they been in special education? And so you'll do that in your introduction. The challenge for this assignment is, and it comes up every semester, don't stress about it if you go over the length. I'm not going to dock you on points on that, because it's extremely challenging for this to try to condense all that information into the length of the report that it calls for in the rubric. So if you go over, it's don't stress, it's not a big deal. But you just try to condense it as much as you can for each one of the sections. If you look at the rubric for this assignment, if you follow that rubric and you can condense it to the best of your ability, you're going to be fine. Okay. We just want to make sure that you were able to use the questions that were specified. There were 12 points, if I remember correctly, 12 or 13. Just make sure you ask those and try to bring your information into the group, condense it, and then put it in that report. Okay. So I hope maybe that might answer some questions or ease some stress if you've been worried about how are we going to get this into that length of a paper. So does anyone have any other specific?
I do.
Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I have a question too.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Angela.
so there were 3 of us in our group, and then I noticed yesterday that we had 2 more people added to our group. We pretty well had written most of the paper
Okay,
with 3 interviews.
who was the 2?
Whitney and is it Trisha?
Whitney and Patricia?
And Trisha, I believe.
Okay. I was looking to see if they're on the Zoom.
I know Whitney is, and I think Trisha is too.
Okay. So when we get done, Whitney and Tricia, when we kind of end tonight, if you would stay on after everyone's exited off, so we can visit and come up with a game plan on that since you were late joining on it, okay? Whitney and Tricia, did you guys hear me? I can't see you. Yeah, okay. All right. That way we can come up with the game plan. All right. We'll work through it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. So I thought that we were supposed to like change the name of our school psychologist, and like we weren't supposed to name any names or our school name or anything.
Student. On student, you always change your name. On this, it's fine if you mention them.
Okay.
Okay. But
Thank
when you do the student, you definitely don't use their name. You come up with the pseudonym on that, okay? Any other question before I kind of get started on the different assessments that we use in special education that I could answer, clarify?
Okay, yeah, so I do. So my question, so when we interview them, so we condense, like kind of introduce them all at the beginning,
Yeah.
in the intro or whatever. But then, so we kind of condense and combine as we're answering each of those questions. We don't have to say, so say my person's was Katie. I don't have to say, well, Katie, da 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 da, and then my other group
Yeah.
member says, well, this, okay.
No, condense it down.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
You will see probably, guys, when you're communicating as your group, you're going to see there's going to be some commonalities in some answers, and you're going to see there's going to be a vast array of differences amongst some of them as well. So just kind of analyze that, condense it down, and as you address each section. Okay, does that
Thank you.
answer your question?
Yep.
Help you out?
Sure does. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Any others before we get into assessment and special education? And then after we go over the slides, I'll kind of briefly talk about the informal, just kind of looking ahead. I know you hadn't even handed in this week's yet, but on this summer semester, I kind of mentioned to you, you kind of, as you're in the middle of wrapping up one assignment, you're already starting to think about and get into the next. And that's kind of how the class flows. So I'll kind of end the discussion with that. Okay, everyone good? All right. So if you look, and these PowerPoints are within the learning modules, and some of them are fairly lengthy. So your reading really for week 2 is looking at chapters 3 and 4. And this particular one is the one I really wanted to talk about and discuss and go over with you. And it's looking at assessments in special education, why we go about doing them, some differences. I may not hit every single slide on this particular one. As I mentioned, they're all available in Blackboard in the learning modules, but I did feel like it was important to kind of go over this one in particular and just kind of talk about these. So when we talk about assessment, basically in special education, we're looking at it is a process that involves collecting information. That's really what we're going to look at when we get into using informal, the CBMs, and the norm referenced. Okay, so when we sit down and go through an assessment process to determine eligibility, we're really not looking at just one particular test session. Before we even get to the point that we want to do a formal test to see if they're going to qualify for services, we should have done some screenings and assessments along the way just to kind of see for sure where that student is, what exactly we can pinpoint their weaknesses to focus on. And then after we've done some modifications and adjustments and track that, and we're not seeing any changes, and we're collecting this data, then we know, hey, we've got some severe discrepancies here. that this kiddo is going to need to be tested. So it's a process of collecting information. Okay, it's not just a sit down one time deal. Testing versus assessment. Okay, often interchanged when we talk about them, but yet there's some differences. So they're also treated synonymously, yet they really are not the same. Testing is just one piece. So when I talk about testing, really it's when the school psych or the psychometry comes in to do their formal. That's when I think about testing. They're going to have them tested or evaluated. Assessment, when I think about it, is more the ongoing process where we're doing a lot of data collections on that kid to also help validate what some of the results are on a formal assessment that the school psych does. And a lot of times when we go and compare and have that multidisciplinary meeting and we talk about their informal assessments or ongoing assessments, and then look at the formal assessment, a lot of times you see a lot of that information correlate with each other. What would be your role in the assessment of students? So regardless of what type of professional you may become, whether it's a special education teacher, whether it may be paraprofessional, whether it's a school psych or psychometrist, all the information that you collect is going to be very important. And also it's going to be very important that each and every person that's responsible for that communicates information amongst each other, and also with your parents as well, especially your parents, because they're an important part of the team. Okay, multidisciplinary team. So in special education, you're going to be working with many professionals. So you guys in your role as a paraprofessional and some of your experiences, if you've been involved in the initial testing of students to see if they qualify for services, or if it's an reevaluation and then they come in, you're going to see there's multiple people in those meetings. Have several of you sat in initial placement meetings or reevaluation meetings? Has anybody got to experience that yet? A few of you, I see some hands. Okay. So when you walk in, Dawn, there's a table with multiple people there that has various roles. Okay. And so those are the ones that make up the multidisciplinary team. And they are the ones that are collecting data, whether it's through assessment or that are actually doing the testing, which would be the school psychologist or the psychometrist. And all that information is brought together, and then they determine eligibility for services. Okay, so decision-making in the assessment process, as I mentioned, it involves collecting information, okay, to determine whether we need to move forward. If that student's making any gains, we've made, as I mentioned earlier, adaptations, modifications, we're monitoring, and then we're trying to decide, do we need to test this kiddo? Assessment plays an important role in determining some major decisions. When you look at special education services, we're looking at eligibility decisions, okay? So we need to make sure we're providing detailed information to see if that child is going to be eligible. And then we need going in and looking at developing the IEP. And I think I skipped right over the first couple. I apologize. Sure did. Looking at evaluation decisions. We're collecting that information. We're looking at strengths, weaknesses, and overall progress. So if we've made modifications, and we're seeing over, Donald, let's say we make some modifications in the classroom, we're going to watch that the next 3 to 4 weeks to see if that student's making any progress. Okay, if we see that they are, we know that those modifications are working, and we need to continue to implement more and see if we can close that gap. If they're not making improvements, we know that we found a significant weakness and they're not making improvements. The second factor, now that I've backtracked, is diagnostic decisions. That's when we're going and looking at all of our results, especially when you have the test examiner that brings his or her information in, meaning the school psych or the psychometrist, and they have a lot of data. I don't know if you sit in and listen to those individuals go and interpret that information and present it to the multidisciplinary team, but usually their reports they bring in are anywhere from 12 to 15 upward to 20 pages long, and it is full of data to interpret. Okay, and so they're going to bring their information to the table, and then the team will compile everything and determine whether that student is going to meet the qualifications to receive services. Okay, so we look at determining if the student is going to qualify, under what category are they going to qualify. So we have 13 different categories that student can qualify under. Okay, so on the screen, you're going to see the individual qualifications. So we have, these are the categories under IDA. Okay, so you have autism, deaf blindness, developmental delay, emotional disturbance, hearing impairments, including deafness, intellectual disabilities. Okay, if you go back prior to IDEA 04, intellectual disabilities was a different name. Anybody know what they use that term for intellectual disabilities? I see Stacy shaking her head. Okay, so the category, and it was very difficult. I remember sitting in meetings, and if a student fell under the 70th percentile, this when you're looking at this category, and it was very difficult to explain to parents. Okay, and it was mental retardation. Okay, and I sit in those meetings when you have to convey that information to the parent and try to get them to understand. And as soon as they heard the term MR, it's a shocker, tears flow and all that. And you try to explain to them that is a category under IDEA that's used to categorize an individual that were their standard score or general intellectual ability score fell the range. That's a category. In their mind, they're automatically thinking when they heard MR, like Down syndrome, that's what automatically, in their mind they would hear. Okay, so they changed that. Now it's categorized as intellectual disabilities. I like that term a lot better. Okay, the next category is multiple disabilities. Then we have orthopedic impairment, other health impairments, OHI, specific learning disability. Then we have speech and language impairments, traumatic brain injury, and then visual impairments. So those are the 13 categories. I want to jump back up to another one and kind of bring out an interesting fact to you. If you look at the term emotional disturbance, has anyone really looked at the criteria for a student that may qualify under emotional disturbance? Has anyone really just sit down and looked at, there's 5 criteria for that? Has anybody studied that? If you have, you may have to speak up because I've got my screen minimized when I'm sharing. So anybody? Okay, so I want to bring this up. So there are 5 criteria for emotional disturbance. If you look at that, and I challenge you to look it up after we get done in the next day or two. If you look at those 5 criteria, you will see they're very broad. Okay, they're not specific, they're very broad. And as adults and us dealing with life, if we look at that on any given day, we probably have experienced at least 2 of the 5. Literally. So that's why I really challenge you to go and look at that. Okay, so sometimes we're putting that category and that label on that child, but you look at the categories and the criteria, and it's broad. I would also challenge you to look at the criteria under ACE scores, ACE, adverse childhood experiences. When we're talking about trauma-informed instruction, I don't know how many of your schools have had trauma-informed instruction for professional development. We talk about ACE scores. and the importance of ACE scores, if you look at those and then compare them to emotional disturbance, ACE is what we identify to determine if a child has had some major traumatic events in their life. And then what do we do just for intervention to help that child better learn in the school environment? Doesn't mean they're qualifying for special services, but compared to emotional disturbance, where it's so broad and there's 5 categories, really, I mean, just about on any given day, if they're coming out of a child or a home and their ACE score is significantly high, or pretty much can qualify easily under emotional disturbance. So I would encourage you after tonight in the next few days to look at the difference between the two. Just something that you might find really interesting. Okay, there are really 3 ways in which students will be identified for assessment of a suspected disability. Classroom teacher might identify some certain symptoms, some things that you're seeing. Stacy, Kim, Dawn, if you're working in a regular classroom and you're noticing some things with little Johnny or little Susie and you're making some adjustments and things just aren't clicking, just are not registering, maybe time to kind of start communicating your concerns with special education teacher and let them know, hey, may see some things here that I may need to be considering our student for testing here. Another thing is the student's work is below expectations for his or her grade level. Student's behavior is also very disruptive, that he or she is unable to learn. Okay, that sometimes the disruption, their behavior, oftentimes is connected to those ACE criteria, things that are going on in home and they're carrying over into the classroom. When we see in some really bizarre behaviors, that's sometimes an indicator we may need to look at some emotional things going on there. So it's really important to develop those relationships with your kids and kind of understand their background and what's going on. Then we have another way, other school personnel may suspect presence of a learning or behavior problem. And they may have those conversations with a parent about, hey, I really think we may need to consider doing some extensive assessments and screenings. I really think maybe little Johnny or little Susie has some deficiencies or gaps in their skill level for reading, math, whatever it may be that you notice they're really struggling on. And it could be that they're scoring consistently below their peers in their classroom. You've been doing some screenings or some more formalized assessments in your school. Some schools do benchmark assessments. You may be monitoring those and seeing, hey, students not progressing, they're just not performing like he or she needs to be. Okay. Under the IDEA, evaluation of a child must be with a suspected disability must be made by a multidisciplinary team. Okay, so again, Dawn, Stacy, I'm using your names because you're right here where I can see you. My screen's minimized. Dawn, you can't just come down and tell a special ed teacher I want little Susie tested. We need to get it done the next day or two. It doesn't just happen like that. There's a little bit of a process, and that's kind of what that's getting to. The professionals involved must use a variety of assessment tools and strategies to gather the information, which I've kind of already mentioned. And that's what you're going to learn about in this class throughout the semester, using the different tools that you're going to have practice with. And then you're going to take that information and combine it with perhaps formalized screenings to come up with what's going to be best for the student. Okay, who's on the team? Multidisciplinary team. Okay, here's a list of possible individuals, professionals in the educational setting. You have your regular education teacher, the school psychologist. It says educational evaluator, could be the school psychometrist. Either of those two individuals are the qualified examiners. The special education teacher, oftentimes you get the speech and language therapist involved. Medical personnel when appropriate, a lot of times, especially if it's an initial and we're trying to rule out some health related causes of what's happening. You might want to get documentation or the parent from the child's doctor, the pediatrician, to look at some of their input. They may notice some things that they have concerns about. Could be a social worker that's embedded within the school, or a social worker outside the school that's already actively involved with the family for whatever reason it may be. They may be receiving services through the Department of Human Services or some outside counseling agencies, which leads to the next thing: school guidance counselors or outside independent counselors. Your parents, school nurse oftentimes is included, and then your occupational and physical therapist when appropriate. Okay, so you may have a kid that's got multiple disabilities and physical limitations. That's where those professionals come in. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of the team members who all is involved. So you can see there's a lot of people that bring a lot to the table. Components of a comprehensive assessment. That's often the assessment that's administered by the school psych or psychometrist. Those are considered norm to reference, and those individuals have to be qualified to examine or administer those assessments. So the evaluation for special education should always be conducted on an individual basis. We do not go in and do a group test to determine if a child's going to qualify. That's always done one-on-one with the examiner. Okay. The next thing is, when it's completed, there's going to be a comprehensive assessment or report of that child's abilities. When that school psychometrist comes in, I mentioned the report's anywhere from 12 to 15, upward to 20 pages. It's going to have background information, health information. We're going to include observations from us as the examiner on how we observe that student's behavior, demeanor during the testing. Okay, so all that's included. No single procedure will be used to determine eligibility. So the school psych, the comprehensive report that we're doing, is another piece of the puzzle or the pie to determine. We're going to take all the information together. Okay. The child must be assessed in all areas related to the suspected disability. So when we come in as a qualified examiner, we're going to give the evaluation that's going to cover multiple areas. It's going to have multiple subtests. So we're going to give an academic test that's going to have multiple subtests, and we're going to give a cognitive test. Then it's going to have multiple subtests within it. So it is going to be very in-depth and very descriptive at the end, at the conclusion of the testing process. Okay, so what all would be included in that? So the individual psychological evaluation or test is going to include their general intelligence. I always say GIA, general intellectual ability score. Their instructional needs. It's going to include strengths and weaknesses that we've identified. I always tell parents when I come in and do it, it is a statistical snapshot in that setting of what their overall skill set is in multiple areas. And I'm bringing it to the table to combine with all the other information. It's also going to be a thorough developmental, social, and academic history, which I just mentioned. All that's going to be included. I'm going to collect, as an examiner, I'm going to have the adaptive behavior reports where the parents go in and they rate things they see at home and in public on their child. I'm going to take all of that and score that and embed it in my report as well. And then any physical examination that might have been conducted, such as screenings for vision, hearing, and other health problems. If that's available, I'm going to take that information and put it in a comprehensive report. And any classroom observations that I might go in and do in advance of doing the formal testing. So you can see there's a lot of information that is collected. Okay. Also, we may have a behavioral assessment that's included. So we've got the educational, the cognitive, and the achievement. Then we may have a behavioral assessment that's done as well. If that is included on the consent to test, there's the boxes we have to check. That includes all the areas. And if little Johnny or little Susie's displaying some major behavioral problems, that is a consideration that you want the examiner to administer a test for those areas. That will be done at the time. Speech and language evaluation, physical occupational therapy, and then also I'm going to take the information the parent has completed on the adaptive behavior skills and incorporate that. Okay. Observations will be included from classroom, getting information from the teachers on academic, motor, and their communication skills. Also social, especially if we're looking at behavioral issues. How do they get along with their peers? How do they interact? What's their social skills like? Are they having major impulse control? Okay, or is there some impulsivity issues there that needs to be addressed? That is when we oftentimes start looking at, are there major emotional issues going on there? So we also include their social skills as well. Okay, so we have some informal and formal observations, basically just simply coming in and observing them in their regular classroom environment. They may not really know who I am other than a visitor in the classroom. I'm just taking down notes and just kind of watching their behavior. Then I may come in and do some more specific observations to collect more data if I think it's needed as an examiner. Okay. Now, one thing that observations are needed, because we get to see just some spontaneous behavior. That really needs to be done, especially if you're suspecting some behavioral issues. It's very important to do this other than just relying on the regular classroom teacher. It's good for us as the examiner to come in and get to see that just spontaneous. They don't know who I am, and I just want to watch them in their normal environment to see what's going on. Some disadvantages to that are I basically have no control over it other than I'm just a bystander doing some observations. Okay, I just sit back and just watch, take notes. And also observer bias comes into play on that. So I have to be real careful and have to be especially considerate of this, knowing that observer bias may come into play. So we got to be real careful on that. Also, different techniques we use for observations in anecdotal records, describing incidents and behaviors in particular settings, going in and writing narratives, and also maybe doing some data collection, charts, some graphs to show when, where, what types of behaviors took place, and what consequences the teacher administered to see if it made a change in their behavior. Common techniques, event recording. I'm going in and listening to the event. The event could be Johnny being up out of his chair and having to be directed. So in a 30-minute period, the teacher had to address Johnny being up out of his chair, running around 23 times in a 30-minute period. Well, that's all that teacher got done. That's an awful lot, right? I'm just kind of throwing that out there, but those are the things that we would document for like event recording. Tally sheets, we're tallying up different behaviors. How many times did I see Susie put her head down on the table and totally ignore the teacher? Well, she did it. I used a tally sheet. She did it 13 times in a 30-minute setting. Okay, so it's just ways to informally document. Duration recording usually requires you to watch a clock, precise measurements. It's a little bit more precise to do that. Then we're looking at just their surroundings and assessing some things that are going on. So in their normal, is the classroom out of control? Could it be a teacher classroom management issue that's contributing to this student? So we have to look at all factors related to this. Advantages of interviewing the student as an examiner. I get to be on a more personal note. little bit more emotionally vested because you're getting to know that student, and also you have some flexibility because you've gotten to know a little bit about that student. I'll give you an example of one as far as advantages of an interview and trying to get personal. I had a student that, young student, obviously was suspecting some autism. We already had medical side, but I just wanted to come in and observe him. Before I even tested him, I knew I needed to get that report. I had to go in 4 different times and just sit in a chair and just watch. The first 3 times I went in, he took off running to the corner and curled up in a ball. Just because I was a new individual in the classroom, all I simply did was just sit down in a chair and just watch. And finally, on the 4th trip I went in, the student did go over and curl up in the ball. After about 10 minutes, he got up and kind of started easing over toward me. And by the end of my observation, he was almost touching me shoulder to shoulder. And then I was able to go in and talk to him after that and develop that rapport and test him. Had I not done that, and I went in there cold turkey and tried to test that student, no way would I have valid results. So sometimes there are those circumstances where getting to know them on a personal note, understanding their emotional state, and then having some flexibility will help you in determining their overall need. Okay. Disadvantages, it's time consuming. It can be costly, especially if you're outside contractor coming in. Those contractors charge your school multiple trips, just coming in, just sit down and trying to establish that rapport. So that's a disadvantage. Sometimes the interviewer and the interviewee may get a little bit too close. There we have some bias in there. And then also could be some concerns with language abilities. Okay, interviews comes in handy, getting to know the parents. So those are just all the different things that we have to go about doing when we talk about assessment. Also, a portfolio could be included to try to just have a broad overview of that student's skill set. So that's another method. It's not necessary that it's a have to, but definitely something that could present some valuable information. We'll kind of skip through here really quick on portfolios. We get into test validity. Again, this is something I would encourage you after we get done the next few days to go back and look at this. We want to make sure our tests are valid. Are they valid? Are they reliable? Do they measure what they say they're going to measure consistently? Okay. If I come in as an examiner and administer the WJ4 and get certain results to a certain degree of a few points, either plus or minus that score I got, another individual should be able to come in and administer the same assessment within a few points above or below, get a fairly consistent score. That's where you determine if that instrument is valid and reliable. So here it talks about reliability, the consistency of measurements you get. Again, does that instrument that's used get consistent results, regardless of if Angela is administering it or Donald or Stacy, anybody? Okay. Norm reference test. This is where we get into a lot of times where you'd have qualified examiners. And I mentioned school psychologists, school psychometrists. These are scores that are not interpreted basically on a specific criteria. Okay. There's multiple things that are used to interpret these tests. It provides a lot of data. When we talk about norm reference, it's comparing Johnny's score to a group of students that have taken that same assessment, that's the same age, in a socioeconomic environment that's similar to that student, to compare his or her score to, and it's normed against them, compared, okay, standardized. So when we talk about using a formal assessment and talking about, is it standardized? Oftentimes that includes intelligence tests and subtests that have math, reading, spelling, a lot of those sub areas. That's what we look at, and that's what they're screened on. Criterion reference, that's a little bit different. You're measuring or assessing that student based on his ability only. You're not comparing it to another group to come up with a normed score. It's basically that student being assessed against themselves to see what little Johnny knows or little Susie. Okay. Now on a criterion reference test, a lot of times state testing back in the day, depending on what state you're in, they use criterion reference test. 70% was considered a passing score, that they were knowledgeable of content. Obviously, you like to see it higher. On a normed reference, if it was below the 70th percentile, that's when we a lot of times start seeing red flags pop up. That's kind of the critical point, that they're getting below the standard deviation, and we need to start looking at some stuff. So that's a difference between those two. Okay. And are they able to master content that's age appropriate for criterion reference? So I threw several things at you there tonight, kind of gave you a broad overview. I just wanted to really kind of go through those slides, because I felt like out of the slides that were available for week 1 and week 2, this was the most important set. There are some for chapters 3 and 4 that I would strongly encourage you to go through and look at, but this particular slide deck will give you kind of just an overview of some information as we start moving forward after this week's assignment is submitted, and we start looking at the first set, which is going to be informal. Okay. Which informal is going to fall more under the line of criterion reference. We're wanting to see what that student knows, what their ability level is for the content that they're being screened on. Okay, so we'll concentrate on norm reference first, and we'll go into CBM and then the normed reference. So, which is what I want to get into next. Looking ahead at week 3's assignments, informal assessment. Does anybody have any questions as to what might count as an informal assessment? And they are exactly what the title says. It's a very informal way to quickly measure a student's ability. If you want to do an informal assessment to check their reading comprehension, their reading fluency, their math addition, subtraction, it's really just looking at a specific skill and using some different informal ways to collect data on how much they have grasped the concept or how strong their skill set is. So Stacy, do you have a question?
Yeah, so we need to do 3 informal tests. So would it be okay to do 1 on reading fluency, 1 on math facts fluency, and then 1 on writing? Would that be acceptable? And then
That's acceptable. I've had them choose 3
Okay.
completely, across the curriculum. I've had some that chose to do informal on one specific skill set. Again, these are things that are going to be quick snapshots to see how knowledgeable that student is and try to identify some strengths and weaknesses. Each week, we're going to try to, out of the different assessments, whether it's an informal or criterion reference, norm reference, the overall goal is, at the end of the semester, as you go and start preparing to do the mock IEP, is pointing out that student's strengths and weaknesses. So essentially, that's what we're wanting to focus on each time you give one of these assessments, because that the whole purpose of doing the mock IEP is basically to present the information that you've collected up to a certain point. We're meeting with the multidisciplinary team in the mock interview. You say, okay, I just want to go over, I've collected data over a period of time, and I consistently see whether it was informal, criterion, or norm reference. It correlates amongst all the different assessments, and I've pinpointed Johnny's strengths. His strengths are this. His weaknesses consistently have been, and that's when you provide that information. So, okay, so you can kind of see how it's all going to tie together at the end. It'll come together nicely once we do it.
I have a question quick. Is
Okay.
there like a specific number of questions that benefit, I guess, an informal assessment? Like you don't want to go under a certain point or over a certain
Informal,
point.
a lot of times, and two, especially like during a regular semester, I say regular semester, fall, spring, where you're in a school setting and all that. Informal, I remember when I was in the classroom, I would do some informals. Like if I was teaching 5th grade math and it was over a review over a division, whatever it was, I may have do exit tickets. So I would have maybe 10 quick review problems at the board to have them do the last 2 minutes. And it was just quick, something that they could go through and get all 10 done. And that was going to be their exit ticket out. I could take those after the students left, and that night I could look and quickly scan those to make sure they understood the concept that I just taught in class that day. So just something that's quick. I would, on your, regardless of what informal test you select to do, whether it's an exit ticket, whether it's short answer, whether it's a writing sample, whatever it is, especially if it's like, I'm just going to use exit ticket, I would probably have anywhere from 6 to 8 questions on there. You want something that's quick. It's not going to stress them out at the end, but you got some specific items on there that you'll be able to tell when you review it that night. I missed it. They didn't get this. I need to go back and reteach it. Or they nailed it. They got it. I know I can move on to the next thing. And that's what's neat about informal, because it's a way for you to assess yourself on your techniques. Oh man, I missed the mark on this. Man, I need to go back and reteach this, or they did not get it. I want to know as a teacher. I don't want to just keep going on assuming they got it. So that's the neat thing about informal. It's quick. It's a quick snapshot view, but you can get some quick important information off of it as well. So that kind of answer your question. That was the long version. Any other questions on that? One thing I can do, I always get this question, and I don't mind to do this if you think it'll be helpful. I always get this question, and it's usually on that first assessment. It kind of gives you the format in the rubric. And it never feels like, how do I do this? I'm so afraid I'm gonna do it wrong. I can go back and pull an informal report that was submitted to me and block out all the names and all that, black them out, and post that for you to just kind of show you the flow of that report and the layout of it, to give you an idea. The one thing, guys, that really is a challenge each semester, don't want to say this to scare anybody or give you a preconceived notion. The one section that students really, because they never had to do this before, there is a section in there, if you look at the rubric, and it's test interpretation. Okay, regardless if you're doing informal, CBM, or norm reference, it's going to ask you to do this. And if you look at the rubric each time, this particular section has more points assigned to it than any other section in the assignment. And it's being able to go and take the information you collected and present it in chart, graph, or table form. Okay, and embed it in your report. And that's why I was telling you, if it will help you, this first one especially, I can go in and pull one that was presented to me previously in previous semesters, black out the name and all that, just so you can kind of see how they set these up. How you want to depict the information in chart, graph, or table form is up to you. It's kind of left up to you, your creativity. But I will tell you this, and there's a reason why we do this, to get you in the habit of doing it and kind of get into that mode. When you sit down and go over information in IEP meetings or having those conversations with parents, it's easy for us to spew out all this information verbally, and especially data, and talk about numbers and all that. And sometimes it's going to go in one ear and out the other, and the parent's not going to understand what you're talking about. And you're going to think, oh man, they got it, they understood. When you can tell them about the information and also show them in a chart, table, or graph, a lot of times it sinks in, they get it. When they can see it in that format, it helps them to understand. And I always tell you this, imagine if you were that parent on the other side of the table and that information was being presented to you. How would it help you better understand what that teacher was explaining to you? Okay. I do that same thing when I do my comprehensive reports. After I've done an initial assessment, I take all that data that's listed, and they can even see all the numbers because they get a copy of my report. And when I'm going over it, and they can look at 3 or 4 pages of a list of numbers and percentages and all that, and not have a clue what I'm talking about. And then the next page, after you see that, everything I've listed in the percentages, I converted into charts, tables, and graphs, and I present that to them, and it helps that parent understand what you're talking about when they can see it. So that's the importance of that section. And if anything, that will help you throughout this class when this semester concludes. That will help you learn how to take that information and put it in those visual presentations to help your parents understand. And I think once you learn how to do that and you start including that in your conversations, it will help those parents to better understand what you're trying to convey to them after you've done screenings or assessments. Okay. So really pay attention to that section of the rubric for each one of those reports that we'll do. Starting with the informal, you'll see that there's more points on that section of that report than anywhere else in that paper. Okay. Any other question?
I was just wondering where the slides that you just showed us, I found in week 1 and week 2, there's the PowerPoint slides for chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4, but I didn't see the ones that you just shared with us.
It was on there. It's you think without losing you when I minimize my screen up. It's not gonna let me minimize because I'm recording now that I've already expanded it. I believe it was in module 1, week 2. You scroll down. There's one more line you can click on where you found chapters 3 and 4. I think it says assessment procedures. What I will do, Stacy, is I will put it in the announcement section. I will put a little note in there for you so you'll know where to find it. If I switch over and try to minimize and switch over now that I've enlarged the screen, it's not going to let me do it. It'll kick the recording off. So I'll put that in the announcement section for you, okay? So you can find it. You're welcome.
Yeah, I couldn't find it either. I don't see what you were saying, so.
Okay, I'll leave you a note on there on the Cliff Notes version on how to find it. So you won't spend a lot of time thumbing through there. There's a lot of information embedded in those modules. You just kind of have to know where to go to. So, but I'll put it on there for you. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I did. I wrote down questions and I couldn't find them right away for this week's assignment.
Yeah.
It says there's a reflection. Is that everybody write their own reflection, or is that like a group reflection?
The reflection basically is your group paper. That's you're reflecting on the interview process. You're putting it into the group paper. Then the next item that you're going to turn in is that the contract that basically lists your group members and kind of what responsibilities and what you agree to do to contribute to the group. And then each one of you as individuals will submit the peer assessment collaboration rubric is what it's called. And again, I'm going to emphasize, make sure you list every person that's on your group and include yourself and rate yourself on that. And you'll submit that as an individual. Okay, it's not part of your group, it's individual, no one else sees it. I don't publish that, put it on there. So the only one that sees it's me when I go over it.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. And all of our interview schedules, and you would like all those from everybody as well?
Yeah, just include that. Yes, ma'am, you're correct. Yeah.
One person for just kind of maybe put out as an appendix, maybe, would that be
Yes,
easy?
that's
for you?
correct.
Perfect.
Yep, that
Awesome.
works. Easiest
Thank
way
you
to
so
do it.
much.
You're welcome. Yep.
Awesome.
Any other question?
For the last class that I was in, when we wrote APA papers, they had said that you don't need to, in your reference page, you don't need to reference interviews because it's.
No, you don't need to really reference interview other than
Okay.
mentioning that person, like when you're introducing them, you know, Mrs. Jones has served as a school psychologist in X number, you know, XYZ school district for 22 years. But no, on this, you don't on interviews really reference him in a reference page or anything. No, you're exactly right. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
No, you're absolutely clear.
Okay.
All right. Any other ones? Okay, so between now and Sunday, if your group has any questions or experience any confusion, just email me. Again, I always try to check those early in the morning and then again right after 5 o'clock. So if I miss you on the front side, I'll catch you on that after early evening session, get a response to you. And then on papers, like I told you guys the first night, always try to get those graded, scored to you and back within 2 days after that due date. I always like to, if it's due Sunday midnight, I always like to have it back to you and done with it by Tuesday evening. That way you can see any adjustments you need to make. That's always been my goal, and I always try to make sure I get that back. So that way you can see if you need to make any adjustments for the next one coming up. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Sorry, can I ask you another question?
I'm gonna limit you, Stacey.
Would it be possible for you to just, could you condense in just a minute you had said that it would be possible for us if we would not be able to confer with our site this summer, and about the norm reference test. Could you just clarify a little bit for me about how that system is going to work, how we're going to do that assignment?
Yep. So what you're going to
With the
do
video?
on that, the video will be, it's actually already on the in Blackboard. You'll see it says testing lab.
I watched it.
video. Okay. And so that was me just giving the cognitive side. I didn't do the achievement side because there's no interaction between the person I test because they're all timed. I just give directions and then they do it and I time them, boom, we're done. So you'll watch that. Then if you are choosing to do that, just send me the email, say, hey, I reviewed that video. Can you send me the comprehensive report? I will send you the full comprehensive report and it shows all the data. And literally you can pick out 2 to 3 areas that you want to report on. You'll see there are a couple weak areas on that particular student. And you can pull those and focus on them, and then you can identify his strengths and identify his weaknesses. There's a narrative in there about his family background, about any medical, tells a little bit about his academic history. He was older, did have some challenges when he was younger, just due to his work ethic and family support. He basically was an overachiever in high school. Did have some attention deficit disorders younger, kind of weaned him off medication and all that. So it tells all about that in there, okay? So you'll pull all that information and start putting in your report to do. For those of you that choose to do that, if I need to, I mentioned that I would do a Zoom session specifically for those individuals that are choosing to do it, and I would break that report down. I'll do a Zoom session with everyone that's wanting to use that and kind of go over that comprehensive report and how to interpret that data, and then how, as an examiner, making recommendations to the team, specific things that I look at in making those recommendations, whether they qualify or not for continuation of services or an initial placement. So, but we'll do that as we get closer. But if you are using it, shoot me an email and I'll go ahead and email you that comprehensive report. And then as we get closer, I'll set up a Zoom time. It might not be on that Wednesday evening. It might have to be on like a Thursday, a separate session from that meeting, because it'll take probably about 45 minutes to go over that report and break it down for you to where you kind of have a basic, understanding of how to read it. Okay.
You don't mean the Thursday before it's due on Sunday, do you?
No.
Okay.
It'd probably be that week before, because it takes a little time to dig through that. Again, that's where I'm going back. I've said this many a times. You'll no more feel like you're right in the middle of doing one and you're already starting and preparing for the next one. They just kind of piggyback each other and you roll right into it on these 8-week courses for our 8-week formats for this particular course. Okay.
Thank you for giving us that option.
Oh, you're welcome.
And
Really, in the
obviously,
summer
email.
session, that's one of the only ways a lot of grad students can do it and successfully complete that assignment. And that's why when they shifted over to a summer session, they asked me to do it because they knew I had the access to those students and the credentialing to do it, to where I could just create that video and utilize it in the future. So yeah.
Well, I worked yesterday and the day before, and I'm going to work tomorrow, but my school psych is going on a long vacation.
Yeah, no problem. I understand. That's why we made the video.
Okay,
That's what we do.
thank you.
So, okay. All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, as we end, I'm going to stop recording in just a second. Then I think I'd ask Whitney and Tricia kind of stay on so we can talk a little bit about your assignment, make sure we get everything squared away here. So other than that, if anybody has questions between now and Sunday, please email. I'll get back to you, and then I'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Okay, everyone good?
Thank you, Professor.
You bet. Thank you guys. Have a good one. Thank you.